She walked into first class, confident, calm, and powerful. But when the flight crew laughed at her ticket, they had no idea who she really was. 30 seconds later, their entire world flipped upside down. If you love seeing justice served and stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that like. Because what happens next will leave you speechless. The story begins in Atlanta, Georgia. Inside a tall glass building that overlooks the city, Danielle Brooks, a 38-year-old black CEO, closed her laptop after a long meeting with her executive team. She had built her company from the ground up, a logistics empire that had recently partnered with one of the largest airlines in the country. She was strong, intelligent, and respected, but most people never guessed how much she owned or how much power she had. She wasn't just another successful entrepreneur, she was one of the airline's silent investors. She owned nearly 30% of the airline's shares, but she rarely revealed that part. Today, she was flying to Los Angeles for a private meeting with the board to finalize a major expansion deal. She could have used her private jet, but she preferred to fly commercial sometimes. It kept her grounded and reminded her of where she started. Danielle was dressed in a simple cream blazer, dark jeans, and heels. Her hair was neatly tied, her eyes focused, and her smile calm. She arrived at the airport early, checked in without any issues, and made her way toward the gate. Everything seemed normal until she reached the first-class boarding line. A tall blonde attendant named Heather stood at the gate, checking boarding passes with a mechanical smile. But when Danielle handed her ticket over, Heather's expression shifted instantly. She glanced at the ticket, then at Danielle, and let out a small, mocking laugh. "Ma'am, this line is for first-class passengers only," Heather said, her voice carrying just enough condescension for nearby passengers to hear. Danielle tilted her head slightly. "Yes. And that's exactly what my ticket says." Heather squinted at the pass again, pretending to verify it. "I think there's been a mistake. Maybe you're supposed to be in business class or economy." A few passengers in line turned to look. One man smirked, another woman whispered under her breath. Danielle remained calm, her voice steady. "There's no mistake. Check again." Heather sighed, clearly annoyed. "Look, ma'am, I'm just trying to help, but you can't hold up the line. Please step aside while we verify your ticket." Danielle glanced at the growing crowd, noticing the judgmental stares, the whispers, the quiet assumption that she didn't belong. Her heart tightened, not from embarrassment, but from disappointment. This wasn't the first time. She stepped aside, letting Heather continue boarding other passengers. The attendant greeted others with bright smiles and friendly tones, a complete contrast to the coldness she showed Danielle. Moments later, another flight attendant, Karen, walked over, whispering something into Heather's ear. They both glanced at Danielle and chuckled softly before pretending to return to work. Danielle caught it, every second of it. But instead of reacting, she waited patiently. Calm, silent, controlled. A younger attendant finally came over to check her ticket properly. After typing into the system, he frowned slightly, then looked up at Danielle with surprise. "Ma'am, your seat is 1A. That's the first-class cabin." Heather's smile faded. "Wait, what?" The young attendant nodded, a little uncomfortable. "Yes, she's in first class. The ticket is valid." Heather looked at Danielle, her face flushed with sudden embarrassment. "Oh, my apologies, ma'am. We've just had a lot of mix-ups lately." Danielle took her boarding pass back. "You didn't have a mix-up. You made an assumption." Heather's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Danielle stepped past her, walking into the first-class cabin without another glance. As she found her seat and placed her bag overhead, she could feel the tension still lingering. She sat down, crossed her legs, and opened her phone, sending a quick message to her assistant. "Boarded. Flight crew needs review. Will explain soon." The message was short but clear. Meanwhile, at the gate, Heather whispered to Karen, "Can you believe that?" She looked like she was lost. "I thought she was trying to sneak in." Karen giggled quietly. "Yeah, I thought so too. Guess she's one of those lucky upgrade people." What they didn't know was that Danielle's name, the one printed right there on that ticket, wasn't just any passenger's name. It was the same name signed on several of the airline's corporate documents. the same name that appeared in the company's top ownership filings. And in less than 30 minutes, that same woman they just insulted would decide the future of their entire crew. But for now, Danielle leaned back in her seat, calm as ever. She'd dealt with this kind of thing her entire life. People who judged her before knowing her. People who thought success had a color, or that power needed a suit and tie. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes louder than anger. But as the plane doors closed and the plane took off smoothly, engines roaring as the city lights disappeared beneath the clouds, Danielle sat quietly in seat 1A, her seatbelt fastened, her tablet open with a few business notes on the screen. She wasn't thinking about the earlier scene at the gate anymore, or at least she tried not to. But the memory lingered, the way Heather's voice had carried that sharp edge, that disbelief that a woman like her could belong there. 15 minutes into the flight, the first-class service began. Heather, now walking the aisle with a tray of champagne, kept her distance from Danielle at first, serving the passengers around her. Danielle noticed the pattern. Heather smiled widely at a man in seat 1B, laughed softly with a woman in 2A, but when she reached 1A, her expression flattened instantly. "Something to drink?" Heather asked without looking her in the eyes. Danielle closed her tablet. "Sparkling water, please." Heather poured it quickly, setting it down hard enough that the water nearly spilled. "Here you go." "Thank you," Danielle said calmly. Heather didn't respond. She just walked away. It wasn't the drink. It wasn't the tone. It was the quiet message in her behavior: "You don't belong here." Danielle had experienced that kind of message her whole life, disguised as politeness, wrapped in control. A few minutes later, Heather returned to collect meal orders. "We have a filet mignon with garlic butter, or a grilled salmon with lemon glaze," she said. Danielle smiled slightly. "I'll take the salmon." Heather didn't write it down. "That's not available anymore," she said quickly. Danielle frowned. "You just said it was on the menu." "Well, we've run out." "It happens," Heather replied, her tone dismissive. Danielle glanced at the passenger in seat 1B, who had just ordered the same dish moments earlier and received a confirming smile from Heather. "Interesting," Danielle said quietly. "I'll just take the steak then." Heather nodded without apology and moved on. The man in 1B leaned over slightly once she passed. "I saw that," he whispered. "That wasn't right." Danielle gave a polite nod. "I've seen worse." She didn't raise her voice, didn't react. Instead, she noted every detail, every word, every subtle smirk. 20 minutes later, the meal arrived. Heather placed the tray on Danielle's table, then turned to another passenger before Danielle could speak. The steak was cold. Danielle pressed the service button. Heather returned with a faintly irritated expression. "Yes. This meal's cold," Danielle said evenly. "Could you please have it reheated?" Heather sighed audibly. "We don't reheat food once it's served. It's against safety policy." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "You reheated one earlier for the gentleman in 2C. Heather froze. "I heard you offer," Danielle continued. "He didn't want to bother you, but you offered anyway." Heather stammered slightly. "Well, that was different." "Different how?" Heather swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I'm just following policy." Danielle stared at her silently, her eyes steady, calm, unflinching. "That's fine," she said at last. "I'll pass on the meal." She pushed the tray aside, opened her tablet again, and began typing a note. Heather hesitated for a moment, then turned abruptly and walked toward the galley, her face red. Inside the galley, another attendant, Karen, whispered, "What's wrong with her?" Heather scoffed. "Nothing. She's just one of those people who thinks being difficult makes her important." Karen peeked down the aisle. "She looks calm to me." Heather lowered her voice. "Trust me, she's playing the victim card. They always do." Danielle couldn't hear every word, but she caught enough. Victim card. The phrase hit harder than the tone. It was the same language she'd heard whispered in meetings, conferences, boardrooms, places where people smiled in her face but doubted her power. Another half-hour passed. Heather returned again for drink refills, smiling at every passenger except Danielle. The first-class cabin had started to notice. A couple seated in 2A and 2B exchanged glances. The man in 1B shifted uncomfortably. Finally, the man spoke aloud. "Excuse me, miss," he said to Heather, "is there a reason you keep skipping her when you serve drinks?" Heather stiffened. "I'm not skipping anyone, sir." He pointed. "You've been past her row twice. You didn't even ask." Heather's smile tightened. "Sir, please mind your own seat." The entire cabin went silent. Every eye turned toward Danielle. She closed her tablet slowly and looked up. "No, it's all right," she said, her voice calm but firm. "She's just doing her job. Or at least trying to." Heather glared at her, then forced a thin smile. "If you have a complaint, ma'am, you can always file it after the flight." "I already have," Danielle said, looking her directly in the eyes. Heather's brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said I already have," Danielle repeated. "In fact, I filed it about 30 minutes ago." Heather blinked in confusion. "You what?" Danielle leaned forward slightly. "You really should check who you're talking to before deciding who deserves respect." Heather frowned. "I don't understand what that means." "You will," Danielle said. At that moment, the cabin intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be cruising for the next 2 hours before our descent into Los Angeles. Please sit back and enjoy the flight." Heather turned away quickly, pretending to busy herself with another passenger. But her hands trembled as she reached for a cup. Something in Danielle's calm confidence was starting to rattle her. Karen approached quietly. "Everything okay here?" Heather forced a smile. "Perfectly fine." Danielle returned to her notes, pretending not to notice the whispers. But inside her, a quiet decision had already formed. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not because of pride, but because this behavior had to stop. She'd built her entire career fighting for fairness, for equal opportunity, for respect that didn't depend on skin tone or assumptions. And she wasn't about to let a flight attendant's ignorance undo that progress, even for a moment. Across the aisle, the man in 1B leaned forward again. "You handled that better than anyone I know," he said softly. Danielle smiled faintly. "It's not about handling it," she replied. "It's about teaching." As the plane continued through clear skies, Heather couldn't focus. Every time she glanced at Danielle, she felt a sharp unease she couldn't explain. Something about that woman's confidence, her silence, her certainty, it didn't fit the image Heather had created in her mind. Then she noticed something. Danielle's tablet screen reflected a company logo, the airline's own logo, and next to it, an internal email chain labeled, "Board Compliance, Crew Conduct Review." Heather's eyes widened slightly. She turned away, heart racing. Danielle caught the glance, closed her tablet, and looked directly at her. Heather froze mid-step. Danielle spoke softly but clearly, "I told you you'd understand soon." Heather blinked. "What does that mean?" Danielle smiled faintly. "It means this flight's about to get very interesting." The cabin falls silent as the captain suddenly calls Heather's name over the intercom, requesting her presence at the cockpit immediately. Heather's name echoed through the cabin, sharp and unexpected. "Flight attendant Heather Cole, please report to the cockpit immediately." Every head turned. Danielle didn't move, but her expression said everything. Calm, unshaken, almost expectant. Heather hesitated, then hurried down the aisle, forcing a stiff smile as she disappeared behind the curtain. Inside the cockpit, the captain, Laura Mitchell, looked up from the console. "Close the door, Heather." Heather obeyed, her nerves obvious. "Is something wrong, Captain?" Laura took a deep breath. "We received a message from corporate during takeoff. It came through the secure internal channel." Heather frowned. "Okay, and?" The captain turned her screen toward her. The message was marked priority, confidential. Heather recognized the header. It was from the Executive Oversight Office, a branch that rarely contacted flight crews mid-flight. Laura continued, her tone calm but edged. It mentioned there was a high-level passenger on board, someone from the executive team conducting an anonymous service review. Heather blinked. "An executive? On this flight?" Laura nodded slowly. "Yes. And based on seat number, it's the woman in 1A. Heather's stomach dropped. "With her? That can't be right." Laura's eyes narrowed. Her name is Danielle Brooks. She's not just a random executive, Heather. She's one of the airline's primary owners. Heather's mouth went dry. You mean she? Laura cut her off. Owns 30% of this company. You just insulted your boss. Heather's face turned pale. Oh my God. Laura leaned back, crossing her arms. What exactly happened at boarding? I need the truth now. Heather stammered. It was just a misunderstanding. I thought she was. You thought she didn't belong in first class? Laura's tone hardened. Heather swallowed hard. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, the captain replied coldly. We've had multiple passenger complaints already forwarded from in-flight Wi-Fi. Apparently, the entire first-class cabin noticed your behavior. Heather felt her chest tighten. I didn't mean any disrespect. I just made an assumption. And that assumption, Laura said, is about to cost you more than you realize. Stay here. I'll handle the announcement myself. Heather opened her mouth to protest, but the captain raised a hand. Not a word. Just stay put. Laura opened the cockpit door and stepped out into the cabin. Her posture was straight, her tone professional, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in her eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, we'd like to thank you for your patience. There's a minor internal matter being addressed, but everything is under control. Her eyes met Danielle's. Ms. Brooks, she said quietly, may I have a moment of your time? The cabin went silent. Danielle closed her tablet, stood, and followed her toward the front of the cabin. The two women stepped into the galley area near the cockpit, out of view from most passengers. Laura spoke first. I want to personally apologize for what you experienced today. It doesn't reflect this airline's values, and I've already initiated a report to corporate. Danielle studied her for a moment. You knew who I was. Laura nodded. The message came through 15 minutes ago. I'm sorry we didn't recognize you sooner. Danielle folded her arms. You shouldn't have to recognize me to treat passengers with respect. The captain exhaled slowly. You're right. Absolutely right. For a brief moment, silence filled the space. Then Danielle said quietly, I want the crew held accountable. I won't tolerate bias on flights owned by my company. Laura nodded again. Understood. I'll make the report myself when we land. Danielle's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. Good. Because this isn't just about me. It's about what happens when power is mistaken for privilege, and when ignorance feels safe enough to laugh. Laura hesitated. Would you like to speak with them? Danielle glanced toward the closed cockpit door. No. Not yet. I'd rather they finish the flight thinking they've gotten away with it. The captain nodded slowly. As you wish, ma'am. Danielle returned to her seat. Every eye followed her. Heather reappeared moments later, face tense, posture rigid. She didn't meet Danielle's gaze as she resumed her duties. The tension was so thick that no one dared speak. Even the passengers sensed something had shifted. The man in 1B leaned toward Danielle. Everything okay? She smiled faintly. It will be. Heather moved robotically, checking seatbelts, pouring drinks, doing everything she could to appear composed. But sweat lined her forehead, and her hands trembled slightly each time she poured. Karen approached her quietly. What's going on? The captain looked furious. Heather whispered, that woman in 1, she owns part of the airline. Karen froze. You're kidding. Heather shook her head. I wish I was. Karen's eyes darted toward Danielle, who sat calmly scrolling through her tablet. What are we supposed to do? Heather whispered harshly, just act normal. But nothing about her voice sounded normal anymore. Fear had replaced arrogance. Guilt replaced confidence. As the flight continued, Danielle opened her email again. She drafted a message directly to the corporate HR director. Subject: Immediate review, flight crew behavior. This report concerns discriminatory and unprofessional conduct displayed by a senior flight attendant toward a passenger. Evidence and witness statements available upon request. Recommend full investigation upon arrival in Los Angeles. Danielle Brooks, co-owner, Skyrise Air. She didn't send it yet. She waited. She wanted them to feel the weight of their mistake first. The meal service ended quietly. Passengers whispered in low tones, avoiding Heather's gaze. Karen handled most of the remaining service herself, leaving Heather standing awkwardly near the galley. When the captain's voice came over the intercom again, her tone was clipped and formal. "Crew, please prepare for mid-flight inspection." Heather looked up, confused. "Mid-flight inspection?" Karen whispered, "We don't do that." The cockpit door opened again, and Laura stepped out with a clipboard in hand. "Corporate requested immediate service documentation. I'll need both of you to sign off your conduct reports for this leg." Heather hesitated. Now, Laura said firmly. She handed the clipboard to Karen first, who signed nervously. When Heather reached for the pen, Laura didn't let go. Their eyes met. "After this flight, you're suspended pending review," Laura said quietly, so only she could hear. "Corporate's orders." Heather's lips parted, shock spreading across her face. "Already?" "But..." Laura cut her off. "Ms. Brooks has already filed her report." Heather's face went blank. She sent it?" Laura's voice stayed calm. "She doesn't have to. It's already in the system." Heather looked past her, toward the first-class cabin where Danielle sat, calm and silent, watching. Their eyes met for the first time since the confrontation. Heather's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't mean to." Laura's tone hardened. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Heather turned away, fighting tears. Minutes passed like hours. The plane continued smoothly through the sky, but the atmosphere inside was suffocating. No one spoke above a whisper. Danielle never broke her calm. She simply watched, noting how quickly arrogance collapsed when faced with accountability. When the captain returned to the cockpit, Heather stood frozen near the galley, unsure what to do next. Finally, she took a slow breath and walked toward Danielle's seat. The passengers turned to watch. Heather stopped beside 1A. "Ms. Brooks," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say..." Danielle looked up. "You wanted to say sorry?" Heather nodded quickly. "Yes. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I didn't mean..." Danielle closed her tablet. "Stop." Heather froze mid-sentence. Danielle's voice was calm but razor-sharp. "Apologies are for accidents. What you did was intentional." Heather swallowed hard. "Please, I'm asking you to reconsider." Danielle leaned back in her seat. "I already did." For a moment, neither of them moved. The passengers around them stared, holding their breath. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom again, breaking the silence. "Ms. Brooks, please meet me in the cockpit. Corporate is on the line." Danielle stood slowly, her gaze never leaving Heather's face. "You might want to stay close," she said quietly. "They'll want to speak with you next." She walked toward the cockpit as the curtain fell behind her. Heather stood frozen in place, her entire body trembling. Inside the cockpit, Danielle picked up the headset, and on the other end was the airline CEO, waiting for her decision about the entire flight crew. Danielle stepped into the cockpit. The door sealed behind her with a soft click, cutting off the cabin noise. Captain Laura gestured toward the comm panel. "Corporate's on standby. They've been briefed." Danielle took the headset, placed it over her ears, and spoke clearly. "This is Danielle Brooks." A voice came through instantly, calm, deep, authoritative. "Danielle. It's Marcus Feldman, Hugh." "Marcus," she said. "I assume you've heard what happened." "I did," he replied, tone tightening. "We got multiple passenger reports, even a few videos uploaded mid-flight. It's already trending on social media. #first-class humiliation." Danielle's jaw set. "That didn't take long." "No," Marcus sighed. "And the footage isn't good. It shows one of our flight attendants mocking you, then refusing service. Some captions are calling it racial discrimination." Danielle's voice stayed steady. "That's exactly what it was." Silence. Then Marcus said quietly, "You have full authority to handle this however you see fit. Whatever decision you make, corporate will back it." Danielle nodded. "I appreciate that." She removed the headset, handed it back to Laura, and exhaled slowly. "I'm taking over from here, Captain. Please keep the plane steady, and leave the cabin door unlocked. Laura nodded once. Understood. Danielle opened the cockpit door and stepped out. The passengers turned immediately. The tension in the air was electric. Heather stood rigid near the galley, Karen beside her, uncertain and anxious. Danielle walked with quiet purpose down the aisle until she stopped at the divider separating first class from the front galley. Every eye followed her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice calm yet commanding, "I want to thank you for your patience today. I know this flight has been unusual, but what happened earlier will not be ignored." Heather's face went pale. Danielle continued, "For those unaware, my name is Danielle Brooks. I'm one of the principal shareholders of Skyrise Air." A murmur swept through the cabin. A few passengers even clapped quietly, sensing something powerful unfolding. Danielle didn't smile. "I didn't intend to make this public mid-flight, but I've decided that accountability doesn't wait for landing." Her gaze locked on Heather. "Heather Cole, senior flight attendant, please step forward." Heather hesitated. "Ma'am, Now," Danielle said. Heather stepped forward slowly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Danielle's tone sharpened. "Do you deny that you question my right to be in first class? That you implied my ticket was invalid because of how I look?" Heather's voice shook. I didn't mean." "Answer the question," Danielle interrupted. Heather's eyes darted around the cabin, searching for escape. "No, I don't deny it." Danielle nodded once. "And do you deny that you continued to withhold service, even after I presented a valid boarding pass?" Heather's shoulders sagged. "No, ma'am." Danielle turned slightly, addressing the passengers. "Everyone on this flight deserves respect, regardless of color, background, or status. The fact that we're still dealing with this in 2025 is unacceptable." A man from business class called out, "About time someone said it." Danielle's expression didn't change. Skyrise Air was founded on principles of equality and service. I helped build those principles into our training programs myself. But it seems some people didn't pay attention. Heather's lips trembled. "Please, Ms. Brooks, I've been with this airline for 15 years. I made one mistake. One public recorded mistake that will define who you are to thousands of viewers," Danielle said sharply. 15 years of work can't protect you from 15 seconds of prejudice." Karen stepped forward nervously. "Ms. Brooks, if I may? I didn't participate." I tried to calm her down. Danielle looked at her briefly. "You'll stay on duty for the rest of the flight. Corporate will review your conduct later. But thank you for your professionalism." Karen nodded, visibly relieved. Danielle turned back to Heather. "As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties." Heather's mouth fell open. "Mid-flight? You can't." "Yes, I can," Danielle said firmly. "You will surrender your badge and company device to the captain when we land. You'll be escorted from the airport by corporate security. Your employment status will be finalized after an internal review, which I'll personally oversee." The cabin fell completely silent. Heather's breathing quickened. "Ms. Brooks, please, just let me explain." Danielle raised a hand. "You've explained enough. This flight isn't the place for negotiation. It's where the consequences start." She turned toward the captain, who had stepped into the cabin quietly. "Captain Mitchell, please ensure the remainder of the flight is handled professionally. I'll stay in first class to observe." Laura nodded. "Understood, ma'am." Heather looked desperate now. "Captain, please." Laura's tone was firm but emotionless. "You heard the directive, Heather. Step back to the galley and stay there." Heather stepped backward, humiliated, her eyes glistening. The passengers avoided looking at her. A few shook their heads in quiet disappointment. Danielle sat back down, opened her tablet, and began typing again. She wasn't writing an email this time, she was drafting an internal policy update. The top line read, "Mandatory anti-discrimination retraining, effective immediately." Across the cabin, the passengers whispered in awe. Some discreetly recorded clips, others typed messages about what they just witnessed. Karen brought Danielle a glass of water. "Mem, May, that was the most powerful thing I've ever seen in my years of flying." Danielle looked up. "Thank you. But it shouldn't have to be. Karen nodded quietly. I understand. The plane continued through clear skies, but the air inside felt heavy, not with tension now, but with realization. Every crew member, even those who hadn't been involved, suddenly stood straighter, spoke softer, served with care. Heather stayed in the galley, isolated, silent, her headset removed. Occasionally she'd glance toward first class, where Danielle sat with quiet composure, but she couldn't bring herself to speak again. Midway through the flight, a small chime sounded from the intercom, the captain requesting Danielle back to the cockpit. She rose and walked forward again. When she entered, Laura handed her the satellite phone. Marcus again. He says the media already picked it up. Danielle took the phone. Put him on. Marcus's voice came through, more urgent this time. Danielle, you need to see this. The passenger footage is everywhere. Major outlets are calling it the in-flight racism incident. Our stock's dipping temporarily. We need an official statement before we land. Danielle thought for a moment. Draft one for me. Skyrise Air stands for equality. Racism has no seat on our planes, not today, not ever. Make it public in 15 minutes. Already on it, Marcus replied. And Danielle, you handled that perfectly. She hung up and looked out the cockpit window. The clouds glowed beneath them, golden under the afternoon sun. For a brief moment, the calm returned, but she knew it wouldn't last long. Because this wasn't over yet. When she stepped back into the cabin, Heather wasn't in the galley anymore. Karen looked nervous. Where is she? Danielle asked. Karen stammered. She went toward the back. Said she needed a moment. Danielle frowned. Without permission? Before Karen could answer, a sharp tone came over the intercom, the captain's voice, tense now. Ms. Brooks, please return to the cockpit immediately. We have a situation. Danielle's heart rate spiked. She turned and moved fast, the passengers looking up in alarm. As she reached the front, the cockpit door opened slightly, and Laura's expression said everything. Something had gone wrong. Danielle stepped inside and froze. Heather was standing behind the co-pilot's seat, tears streaming, headset clutched in her shaking hands. I'm not leaving this plane until you tell them I'm not fired. The cockpit was filled with tension so thick, it felt like the oxygen had thinned. Heather stood just behind the co-pilot's seat, her hair slightly undone, her face streaked with tears. The headset in her trembling hands was still connected to the line. Captain Laura stood tense in front of her, one hand raised. Heather, put the headset down. Step away from the controls. Heather's voice cracked. I gave 15 years to this airline. 15 years. And you're going to throw it all away because of one mistake. Danielle stepped in, calm but firm. Heather, no one's taking your years away. But you crossed a line that can't be ignored. Heather's eyes darted to her. You think I'm a racist? You think I meant it? You don't understand what it's like being blamed for everything because of one word, one look. Danielle kept her tone even. You don't get to play the victim here. You humiliated a passenger, and it just happened to be the wrong one. Heather let out a bitter laugh. The wrong one? Right. Because if you weren't the owner, no one would care. Laura stepped closer. Enough. Hand me the headset. Heather shook her head violently. No. I'm not done explaining myself. Her voice echoed in the small space, startling even the co-pilot, who looked frozen in place. Danielle stayed composed, her presence commanding. Heather, you need to calm down. We're in the air. Your emotions can't be in control right now. Heather's breathing grew heavy. You think I don't know that? I've given my life to this airline. I've missed birthdays, funerals, everything for this job. And now you just erase me with one order. Danielle's voice softened slightly. You erased yourself when you chose pride over professionalism. Heather's grip on the headset tightened. You don't know me. You just judged me because I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. Laura stepped forward cautiously. Heather, look at me. Step away from the cockpit chair. We're still in control of a commercial aircraft. This is not the place for this conversation. Heather blinked, her voice breaking. You're all against me. You, her, corporate, everyone. Danielle exhaled slowly. Heather, listen to me. If you don't calm down, I'll have no choice but to report this as a security breach. Heather's head snapped toward her. You wouldn't. Danielle's eyes didn't waver. Try me. Silence filled the cockpit. The hum of the engines was the only sound. Laura extended her hand again. Give me the headset. Please. Heather looked down at it, her fingers trembling. She hesitated, then dropped it to the floor. The sound was sharp, final. Laura immediately kicked it away and gestured to the co-pilot. Lock communications. Route all signals through my panel. Heather slumped into the jump seat, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't mean to lose my job. I just wanted respect. Danielle's expression remained unreadable. Respect is earned by how you treat others when no one's watching. Heather covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. The tension in the room shifted from anger to grief. Danielle glanced at Laura. I'll handle this. Laura nodded. You sure? Yes, Danielle said softly. I need to. She crouched slightly, lowering her voice so only Heather could hear. You've built a long career, Heather. But what happened today, the way you treated me, that wasn't an accident. It was a reflection. Heather's hands dropped slowly. Of what? Of who you've become, Danielle said quietly. And maybe this is your chance to change that before it's too late. Heather's eyes glistened. You think firing me will change anything? You think this will make people less racist? No, Danielle said, straightening. But it'll make this company less tolerant of it. Heather stared at her, speechless. Laura spoke up again. Ms. Brooks, we'll be starting descent into LAX in 30 minutes. Do you want her restrained? Heather flinched. Restrained? I'm not dangerous. Danielle shook her head. No. She's not a threat, she's just broken. Laura nodded, returning to her seat. Understood. Danielle turned to leave the cockpit but stopped halfway through the door. She looked back at Heather, who sat small and defeated in the corner. You have 15 minutes before I call corporate again, Danielle said quietly. Decide how you want them to remember your exit. Then she walked out. The curtain fell shut behind her. Back in the cabin, whispers buzzed like static. Everyone had heard fragments of the commotion, but no one knew the full story. Passengers stole glances toward the front as Danielle returned to her seat, calm once again. Karen approached nervously. Is everything okay, ma'am? For now, Danielle replied. But we'll be landing soon. Keep everyone settled. Karen nodded quickly and returned to her duties. Danielle leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything sink in. The situation had gone further than she expected, from humiliation to chaos, from confrontation to crisis. Then the intercom buzzed softly. It was Laura again. Ms. Brooks, slight turbulence ahead. Please fasten your seatbelt. Danielle obeyed, glancing briefly toward the galley. Heather wasn't there. Karen noticed too. She's still in the cockpit, right? Danielle nodded. She should be. But something in her tone betrayed uncertainty. The turbulence grew stronger, the cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. The plane shook lightly, drawing gasps from passengers. The captain's voice came again, calm but clipped. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're passing through a brief patch of unstable air. Danielle stayed still, eyes fixed on the cockpit door. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened slightly, and Heather stepped out. Her uniform was disheveled, her expression strangely blank. Every passenger turned toward her. She didn't speak. She just walked slowly down the aisle toward the back, ignoring everyone, tears streaking silently down her face. Karen moved to follow, but Danielle raised a hand. Let her go. Heather reached the rear galley and stopped, staring out the small window into the endless clouds. For a moment, she didn't move. Then her voice came softly, almost to herself. I gave this airline everything, and it gave me nothing back. Karen whispered, should I check on her? Danielle shook her head. Not yet. Heather stood there for several minutes, completely still. Then she turned around and walked back up the aisle, straight toward Danielle. The cabin went silent again. Heather stopped beside Danielle's seat. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady now. You were right. Danielle looked up. About what? Heather swallowed. About me. I became the kind of person I swore I'd never be. I let bitterness take over everything. Danielle said nothing. Heather took a deep breath. I'm not asking for my job back. I just want to apologize to the passengers, properly. Danielle studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Do it. Heather turned to face the cabin. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger with every word. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to sincerely apologize for my behavior earlier. What I said, how I acted, it was wrong. No passenger should ever be treated that way, no matter who they are. The cabin was silent, every passenger watching her. She looked back at Danielle. Thank you for making me face myself. Danielle gave a faint nod. You can start making things right by owning it. Heather nodded once. I will. She turned and began walking toward the front again. For a moment, it seemed like peace had returned. Then suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the cockpit. Laura's voice shouted through the intercom, alarmed. We've lost power to the right engine. Heather, I need you back here now. The passengers gasped. Heather spun around, and Danielle shot to her feet. As alarms blared and the plane began to shudder, Danielle and Heather locked eyes. The woman she just fired was now the only one who could help save the flight. The plane lurched violently to the right. Oxygen masks rattled in their compartments as gasps filled the cabin. Danielle gripped her armrest as the intercom crackled again. Captain Laura's voice, tight with strain. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We've experienced a temporary engine failure. Crew, emergency positions. Heather didn't hesitate. Instinct took over. She bolted for the cockpit, hair whipping behind her, ignoring Danielle's warning call. The passengers watched, frozen in fear. Inside, alarms blared. The right engine indicators flashed red. The co-pilot's voice was frantic. Fuel pressure's dropping fast, backup isn't stabilizing. Heather slid into her jump seat, flipping switches with practiced precision. Bypass the secondary flow regulator. It's the same issue we had on Flight 247 last year. Laura's eyes widened. You remember that procedure? Every second of it, Heather said, moving with mechanical focus. Cut fuel feed manually. Reboot System 3. Danielle appeared in the doorway, gripping the frame for balance. Can she fix it? Heather didn't look back. If you want to land this plane, let me work. The cockpit shook again as lightning flashed outside. The storm had rolled in fast, turbulent winds battering the wings. Heather leaned over the console, muttering to herself. Come on. Then, a sharp click. The warning lights dimmed. The engine status flickered from red to amber, then green. Laura exhaled sharply. She did it. The co-pilot grinned in disbelief. Power restored. Stabilizing altitude. Heather sat back, panting, her hands shaking. Danielle looked at her, not with anger now, but something closer to respect. Laura turned. Heather, that was flawless. You just saved 200 lives. Heather swallowed, eyes glistening. I just did my job. Danielle stepped into the cockpit fully, her voice low. No, Heather. You did more than that. You proved what real accountability looks like. Heather looked up slowly, guilt still etched across her face. Does that mean I'm forgiven? Danielle paused, choosing her words carefully. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. But this was redemption. Heather nodded, fighting tears. Thank you. Laura turned back to her instruments. We're cleared for emergency priority landing at LAX. 20 minutes out. The worst seemed over. The passengers were calming, the crew reuniting under Danielle's quiet leadership. Then the cockpit phone buzzed. Laura answered, her expression darkening. She turned toward Danielle. Tower says the video of the earlier incident just hit national news. Reporters are waiting at the terminal. They're calling it racist. Flight attendant saves plane she nearly destroyed. Danielle's eyes widened slightly. Already? Laura nodded grimly. They want a statement, from both of you. Heather looked at Danielle, tears forming again. You want me to face the world after this? Danielle met her gaze evenly. You're going to Because real change doesn't happen behind closed doors. It happens when people see the truth. As the wheels lowered and Los Angeles loomed beneath the clouds, Danielle turned to Heather and said quietly, "When those doors open, it's time to face what comes next." The plane touched down at LAX with a screech of metal and a chorus of relieved applause. Danielle stayed seated, calm as the cabin erupted in chatter, everyone whispering about the black woman who just saved them all and the racist crew who insulted her. She didn't smile. Not yet. As the plane taxied toward the private terminal, the flashes began, photographers and reporters already waiting near the gate. Security lined the runway, ready to escort her out. Captain Laura unbuckled and turned to Danielle. "They're waiting for your word before anyone leaves the aircraft." Danielle nodded. "Good. Let's end this properly." Heather stood a few feet away, eyes lowered, uniform smudged with grease and tears. She looked nothing like the arrogant attendant who had mocked Danielle hours ago. She looked small, raw, human. When Danielle stood, the cabin fell silent. Passengers instinctively moved aside, watching her walk down the aisle. The same people who had watched in discomfort earlier were now filming her every step. Heather swallowed hard. "Danielle, before we go out there, Not here," Danielle said softly. "You'll speak outside. Where everyone can hear you." The cabin door opened. A gust of hot California air rushed in, along with a wave of camera flashes. Reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Brooks, is it true you were racially profiled mid-flight? Did you really fire the entire crew? Do you plan to sue the airline?" Danielle stepped forward, chin lifted. Her voice was steady, cutting through the noise like a blade. "No comment until I speak to my team." But she didn't walk away yet. She turned to face the crew, Heather, Laura, and the others standing behind her, and then faced the crowd again. "This," she said, "is what accountability looks like." Silence fell instantly. "This morning I boarded this plane as a paying passenger, not as a CO, not as a shareholder, just as a woman. I was insulted, mocked, and judged for the color of my skin. And the people responsible were supposed to represent the company I helped build." Gasps rippled through the reporters. Danielle's words hit hard. "Yes," she continued, "I own 40% of this airline. And today I saw firsthand what my customers go through. The difference is, I have the power to fix it." Heather's lips trembled as she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Danielle turned to her. "You should be." Then, after a beat, "But I also saw what you did up there when it mattered. You saved lives. You proved that people can change when they're pushed to face who they are." Heather blinked rapidly, tears spilling. "Does that mean you're not firing me?" Danielle took a step closer, her voice low enough for only Heather to hear. "You're fired as a flight attendant. But if you're serious about change, you'll join the diversity and inclusion program I'm launching next month. You'll help me rebuild what your prejudice broke." Heather's eyes widened. "You trust me with that?" "I'm not trusting you," Danielle replied. "I'm challenging you." The reporters' microphones pushed forward again. One shouted, "Ms. Brooks, what message do you have for the world after what happened today?" Danielle turned toward them fully, posture regal, eyes unwavering. "My message is simple," she said. "Racism doesn't disappear in silence. It ends when we hold people accountable, and when we choose education over vengeance. Today wasn't just about humiliation. It was about exposure, the kind that forces change." Applause erupted among the passengers who had gathered behind her. Someone yelled, "You tell them, ma'am." Another shouted, "We're with you." Heather stood beside her now, silent but visibly humbled. Captain Laura added, "And as captain I can say, this airline will never be the same after today." Danielle nodded once. "That's the goal." She turned toward the terminal, where a black SUV waited with tinted windows and her executive team inside. As she began walking, Heather followed her, still unsure if she should. Danielle stopped suddenly and glanced back. "Heather." Heather froze. "Yes, ma'am?" "Next time you see someone walk into first class," Danielle said, "don't look at their skin. Look at their presence. Respect doesn't come with color, it comes with character." Heather nodded slowly, her voice breaking. I understand. Danielle gave a faint smile. Good. Because from this moment on, the world will too. She turned and entered the SUV, the door shutting behind her as cameras flashed like lightning. Inside, her assistant handed her a phone. The board's on the line. They're asking for an official statement. Danielle looked out the window at the plane, now surrounded by media. Tell them this isn't just a PR issue. It's a turning point. We're cleaning house, starting today. As the SUV pulled away, the TV screens outside replayed the headline that was already going viral. Black so humiliated in first class, fires entire crew, then hires them to rebuild her airline's soul. Danielle exhaled deeply, closing her eyes for the first time since takeoff. True power isn't about revenge. It's about transformation. When you rise above hate, you don't just win, you rewrite the rules. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because more true stories like this are coming. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Danielle? Because sometimes, justice doesn't shout, it acts.